If surnames were a label to the talents people have, a boy born in Leeds in 1935 would have been called not Barry Cryer, but Barry Laughter. For 50 years, on stage, television and radio, Cryer has been making people smile, often without them knowing the wit came from him. Although his comedy career began in strip clubs in the 1950s, telling gags between the acts, he took a long time to show the public all he had. For many years, he was heard but not seen, writing jokes for performers including Frankie Howerd, the two Ronnies, Morecambe and Wise and Tommy Cooper. But then became more visible and audible as a stand-up comedian, after-dinner speaker, and panellist on Radio 4's long-running joke game show, I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. He also claims, which he insists is not a joke, that he was once a chart-topping pop star in Finland. If anyone might have a clue to how humour works, it's Barry Cryer. Lots of people have analysed comedy and they've written books about why people laugh and how jokes work. You've done a lot of this. Are there any theories or rules as to how it works?
There are hundreds of theories. I heard Dennis Norden on the radio yesterday, as you and I are talking now, and Dennis said he and Frank Muir met Mel Brooks in America, and Mel Brooks asked them what they were currently doing, and they'd both become comedy consultants in television, and Mel Brooks said, "You mean you know?" And it's like that. Analysing comedy is like dissecting a frog. Nobody laughs and the frog dies. You know, you don't know what it is. Long before there was a programme called The X Factor, I used to say, there's an X Factor, and by that I meant, having written for so many comedians, the fine analysis is you can't analyse quite why it happened. They have skill and timing and a delivery, but there's something funny. The old ungrammatical saying, people who say funny things and people who say things funny, you know, as in funnily, you can't analyse it. Tommy Cooper, a classic example, I suppose, of you knew he was big and ungainly and a brilliant magician who pretended to be a bad one and had a funny laugh and a great face. But there was something mysterious there as well that made an audience really like him and laugh.
Eric Morecambe, I heard on the radio again the other day, it was a television sketch, so no facial expressions or anything. But every single thing he said, even if it was a single word, Eric Morecambe was funny.
It's the delivery thing. Groucho Marx, excuse me, Jackie Mason, I think is a current example of, they could make the phone book sound funny. They have a wonderful sense of delivery, and they're again indefinable. Why are their voices funnier than other people's? I've never ceased to be fascinated by this.
And people become obsessed. Neil Simon, the American playwright, he used to say that certain vowel sounds were funnier than others. And there's another example, Dad's Army, when that was done in America and the character Pike became Henderson.
Yes.
The famous line in Britain, "Don't tell him, Pike," about the name, it didn't get a laugh in America, and they became obsessed that was because for some reason Henderson wasn't funny in the way that Pike was.
Well, Pike's got the letter K in it, which is one of Neil Simon's precepts, isn't it?
Yeah.
The letter K is good. He does that in The Sunshine Boys, think about it too. K's funny. Knickers is funny, panties isn't.
But is there anything in that, do you think?
It's just a hard consonant sound, I don't know. K's and G's, maybe. We're getting analytical.
We're dissecting the frog, but then I suppose it's not illogical because you're trying to trigger that reaction.
Yes.
In the audience.
And the consonant hits the ear harder than the vowel does. Am I really saying this?
And in English comedy in particular, there are clear characteristics. The pun, for example, a lot of your comedy and all you've done has been wordplay. And when you talk to French people about this, it is something that's very English.
The English love puns. I think the French do puns. They have their own puns, but it's not as much of a staple element in what they do. We've always loved that wordplay, the punning and the spoonerism and all that sort of stuff. And, of course, they don't translate. Puns don't travel. I don't think Americans are big on puns, are they?
There's an amazing one in your memoirs, a Humphrey Lyttelton story about bird watching.
Oh, yeah.
In which there's an astonishing double.
Yes. The story goes, Radio Clyde in Scotland, well, it would be, wouldn't it? Humphrey's being interviewed. He was doing some food writing as well in those days. And the interviewer, I've asked him about this, the interviewer said, "Ah, Mr. Lyttelton, I believe apart from your jazz and your food writing, you're a very keen orthonologist. And Holmes said, you mean word botcher? And I taxed him with this, and he said, l'esprit d'escalier, he said, I thought of it on the way home. He was very honest. But that is brilliant.
But it also requires the audience to be very quick to get it. But minds work like that they can see the reversal.
A good pun paints another picture. My old friend, the late Dick Vosborough, who was brilliant spoonerism and pun man, he could lead me by the nose and say something seriously, and I'd fall for it every time. And years ago, when Buster Keaton was still alive, Dick Vosborough said to me, you know, they're doing a new film about the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and Buster Keaton is playing Sitting Bull, which was entirely credible, that wonderful face. And then Dick said, imagine that, Custer beaten by Buster Keaton. And that was Dick, you see. He had you going all the time. And I love that. It's playing with the language, enjoying it.
We see it in your autobiography that you write an apparently simple line and then suddenly you reverse it, you do something with it.
Yes, you try and turn it on its head. We're analysing it.
We are, I'm afraid we are.
No, it's a sort of the surprise element or the incongruous, you know. You're leading the audience along with a line or a sentence or whatever, and then there's something happens at the end, you know. It's like the banana skin. You do something else that they weren't expecting.
Or spotting something in a line. There's a very funny joke in the autobiography, which is a tribute. I think it's someone in a TV studio where somebody turns up during a recording with the news, Cilla Black is ill, and she can't sing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I'm crediting it or debiting it to the right man, Tommy McQuater, great session musician, trumpeter, and Ronnie Hazelhurst, the MD. They were going to pre-record a Christmas show with Cilla, and then she got the flu or something, and they finished up doing the show live in the finish. But Ronnie walked in and informed the whole band, you know, they were going to be paid, but they weren't going to do the session that night. Cilla's ill and she can't sing. And Tommy McQuater said, the first is news, which, that's the story I heard, Sil.
We talked about puns in English, also the dirty joke, which there are in all cultures, but particularly in English comedy.
Oh, yes.
And you had a long blue period, didn't you, writing for Danny LaRue?
Yes, but there was there again, it was playing with the language. He played a precursor, funnily enough, long before Margaret Thatcher achieved prominence. We had this fearsome Tory lady called Lady Cynthia Grope, and she would be interviewed by me or somebody else in the show, and you would say to Lady Cynthia, let's talk about Edward Heath, and she would say, and people do, you know. What do you think of Michael Foote? A wild exaggeration. You know, it was that. So the audience had to keep up with what was going on, and Dan loved that. He wouldn't countenance swearing or anything, but he loved the disguised, thinly disguised dirty joke, which I enjoy enormously.
And particularly at the start of your career in television and radio, you couldn't get away with that much.
No.
There's a Max Miller story where he told a joke at rehearsal, which seems incredibly mild now. But
it's quite quaint.
There was horror about whether he could actually say it on air.
Yeah, do you want me to?
Yeah.
The story was this bus breaks down, and it was the days when they had a conductress on the bus, and the driver said the conductress, I'm sorry, I'm doing an abysmal impression of him, but it's the delivery again. And he says to the conductress, don't bother ringing the garage, I'll have a look myself. Gets his head under the bonnet, 10 minutes go by, the passengers get very impatient. Conductress walks down the front of the bus and says, do you want a screwdriver? He said, no, we're 10 minutes late already. Now then, very mild by today's standards, and he told this at the run-through of a show called Midday Music Hall, which was live on the radio, midday.
And this is mid-50s?
No, late 50s. It was about 1957, 8. And the great Miller was top of the bill. So he told that joke, and Bill Worsley, I remember the producer's name, buried his head in his hands in the box and said to Max, you're not going to tell that today. I might not, I don't know. So we all went to Sherlock Holmes pub in Northumberland Avenue. Ray Ellington and his quartet, these are topical names, they were on the show as well, and Ray put a bet on in front of everybody in the pub that Max wouldn't tell that joke. And I think it was £5 note or something, which was, you know, solid bet in those days. And then we all clustered round when the great Miller went on, and he did his act and sang his song and finished, and never told the bus joke. We all went back to the pub. Ray Ellington approached Max Miller and said, come on, pay up. What? He said, "You never told the bus joke." I was going to, and then they flashed that light. And he wouldn't pay up on the bet. He wouldn't back off on the bet. He got his cover story. They'd flashed the light at me. I hadn't got time.
But he was too frightened to tell it.
He was just winding the producer up, I think, to get him on edge for the show. No, he probably wouldn't have told it.
Another theory that a lot of people have, to the extent that it's become a cliche, is the unhappiness that lies underneath comedians. But it's like a lot of cliches, it's hard to get away from it. I mean, even reading your book, the people you've written for, it's there in a lot of them, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
Tommy Cooper, Eric Morecambe to some degree, the stress that he was under all the time.
Yes. The sort of broken-hearted clown thing, I think, is overdone by a lot of people because Les Dawson particularly was just the same off as on, basically. I mean, highly intelligent man, obviously, and must have had his down moments and everything, but in my experience, it was virtually, there was no join. But what you just mentioned was he gave so much of himself off stage as well as on, that maybe that stress, really got to poor Les in the finish. Because David Nobbs and I used to write for him a lot, and we would see him in full cry in the bar before a TV recording, go up and excuse ourselves to the people he was talking to and say, "Come with us, Leslie, and sit down, you're working tonight." So he was apparently very uncomplicated in that respect, Les, he was just the same. But the prime examples, extreme examples, they're Tony Hancock, for instance, who had a lot of problems and depressions, and Tommy
killed himself.
Was not a stranger to the bottle, Tommy Cooper, and Eric was a worrier. When they cut down on the routine of shows, they'd stop doing the brutal every week recordings, and they would probably be doing 2 or 3 shows a year, but he would worry enough about those 2 or 3 shows a year. He was a perfectionist. Everything had to be right. Oh, yes.
And that stress, it's because if you make serious speeches, even as a politician, you never quite know how bored people are, perhaps.
Yes.
But if you tell a joke and it doesn't work...
It's naked.
Yeah.
I would say if you're a singer and you've got a good voice and you choose your material, the voice is in good shape, most audiences will listen and clap at the end. But comedy is very personal. Within the first few minutes, you know if it's working or not. And people get very almost personal, emotional in their reaction. They say, "I love him, I can't stand her." In a way, they don't talk about other performers, really. If somebody doesn't make you laugh, you resent it. They're paid to make you laugh. It always polarises people, comedy. Immediately you can mention any name. And there are certain glorious exceptions, although I met a man once who said, "Eric and Ernie never did anything for me, I couldn't see it."
My grandfather walked out of the room when Eric Morecambe came on TV.
Well, there we go. And Tommy Cooper, I don't know whether you have. I've never heard anybody say, "Well, it never made me laugh. Couldn't see that at all." He's a glorious exception. He seemed to have had acceptance all over the place, Tommy. But it does polarise people. And comedians use violent expressions themselves. They say, "I died." And if they went very well, they say, "I killed them." It's really sort of very extreme language.
You refer in the memoirs just once, in passing, you talk about there have been depressions, there have been failures. What about you? I mean, there is, without invoking the cliche, there's been some unhappiness underneath it all.
With me? Yes. Mainly operations and a bit of health problems here and there, but not, I can honestly say, hand on heart, that in our business, I mean, there must have been some awful things going on, and if you lifted the lid, the lid was lifted once or twice, I went, "Oh." But I seem to have spent years, and unless I'm remarkably insensitive or unobservant, I spent my time mainly with people I liked and admired, laughing a lot. I'm rarely in television studios these days, but I do get a bit depressed now when I go in and they're doing a comedy show and nobody's laughing. I mean, you take the job seriously, but in rehearsals we were always laughing about something. There was a levity there that kept you going through the day.
But that's because of a trend, which is one of the things I wanted to ask you about, is towards, particularly the younger performers, a very serious kind of comedy. If you look at what Ricky Gervais, Steve...
Oh, yeah. There's more intelligence, around now. A hell of a lot of intelligence. But the warmth factor, the X factor, the warmth, the thing that when somebody walks on, the audience go, we're in safe hands. And right. Peter Kay's got it. I think Billy Connolly's still got it. There's a great wave of warmth. But I hate people of my age who are not what's going on now, because I think that so many brilliant people around now. And as you indicated, very serious issues, not just jokes, observational things. I do something on the Fringe every year in Edinburgh, and they call me Uncle Baz, the young stand-ups, and they love jokes in conversation. That is a common currency with whatever age you are as a comic, but they don't do jokes when they're on. Ross Noble actually said to me, what you're doing is so old it's new, don't change a thing. I'm probably the only one there who tells jokes per se, but I love people who are observational and riffing off the audience and spiraling off all over the place with what they're talking about. I love that.
So the distinction, you're talking about gags, that a formal gag that
Yes.
has a setup and
Yes.
a punchline.
Yeah, I mean, what I do is formulaic. It is one-liners, jokes, and anecdotes. And, you know, clearly laid out before you.
Another cliche which people always sees on with people who've gone into comedy is the school years, the famous thing of having started telling jokes to avoid being bullied or to win favour. We might as well get it out of the way. Is there any of that for you?
No, I don't think so. I don't. Emo Phillips, the American comedian, wonderful. An interviewer said to him, did you make your colleagues and friends laugh to avoid the school bully and everything? He said, I was the school bully. I was the Bilko. I was, what's the angle here? You know, I sold a shortcut for the cross-country run in a sealed envelope.
And you had a black market deal going with dinner tickets.
We used to have, dinner. Lunchtime tickets. It's so strange looking back. And, I think some were retrieved from a bin which we recycled. I mean, I'm not proud of any of this, but ducking and diving all the time.
But in one way, your childhood was about as unfunny as it can be, because your father died when you were very young.
Yeah. And the older I get, the more envious I am when people say my dad or my father, because, you know, outside the family, I met one older man when I was doing an after-dinner in Leeds for Waddington's, a company up there. And this older guy said, are you Carl Cryer's son? And I said, yes. And he said, I knew him. And so I grabbed hold of him. We went and had a pint. And obviously, if he didn't like my father or my father wasn't like a man or something, he probably wouldn't have approached me at all. But the picture he painted of my dad being really good man and jovial and warm and everything, it really, I got quite emotional about it, because he was one of the few people outside the family who suddenly spoke about my father. My dear mother never spoke about him. That was it.
Why was that? But she couldn't bear to?
They couldn't bear to, I don't think, which I respected. But looking back, I realised that she never mentioned him. Other people did, but not my mum, you know.
You also say something very strange in the memoirs, that you found out about your father's death from a school friend.
Yes. I'd been told by my mother that Dad was ill. And somebody at school said, yeah, your dad's dead. And I couldn't cope with this, so we had a fight and punched each other a lot. And I thought, that is, young as I was, I thought, what's that all about?
So he was in hospital, presumably, was he?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
he had died, and she simply hadn't told him.
She told me he was ill. Yeah. He was poorly. And when I looked, I'd love to. Well, I did meet the man, but you know the memories aren't too clear because I was so young. But he was an accountant and a mason and a golfer. You know, how different can you be from your dad? But that fascinated me.
A lot of psychiatrists would think that this must have damaged you in some way, or at least affected you.
I don't know. I just steam on. I would think that there's probably a case made for that, but I'm not particularly interested in the subject. You know, other people interest me more than I do, if you see what I mean. I just, you know, get on with it. Very basic, not very sensitive approach, I suppose. But no, I don't know that it scarred me unduly. I had a wonderful mother. My brother was away in the Merchant Navy, 9 years older. And it was me and my mum. She did a great job. And then when I just took off and left home and went on tour and everything, not a word of recrimination or anything, totally supportive. What she was thinking is another matter, because she was, it was that middle-class thing. But then I heard she was talking to the aunties and the rest of the family about what I was doing and everything, but when I was doing it, she didn't talk to me about that either. Came to see me when I did my very first paid job at the City Variety Theatre in Leeds. There was a pattern emerging. That was also, in those days, home of strippers and everything. No decent Leeds woman would be seen in there. It was all the raincoats, sales reps for the commercial travellers. And I was living at home and coming home and having supper every night. And she never mentioned it, or how's it gone, or what. And I gave up by about Wednesday. And on the Friday night, I came home and had supper, and she cleared the table and walked away into the kitchen and said, the suit looked nice. I suddenly realised she'd been in. She'd crept in to the theatre that night. They told me the next day that she'd been lurking in the alleyway near the box office and been taken in. They refused to sell her a ticket. The woman in the box office said, I knew it was your mother. And she saw me, apparently, and then fled into the night. And I was very touched by that, but there'd been no reference to this all week.
I wanted reading the memoirs and having heard you on the radio and seen you in stage shows and so on. Something you do a lot, which you admit, is the digression, that you start off on a subject, often quite a serious one, and then instantly you go for a joke or a story or whatever. And I wondered if that was perhaps connected with what happened to you in childhood.
Yeah, I've been accused quite warmly by friends and people of always sidestepping issues with a joke as well. Entirely the wrong moment often. There is a compulsion in me. It's a sort of, it's a bit, I'm not being flippant about this subject, but it's a bit like Tourette's syndrome insofar as the joke is going to blurt out, if I'm not careful, about almost anything, and that is very heavy going for other people. I really do sympathise with them. I try and fight it, but not always successfully.
But even in the memoirs, you reveal in a couple of sentences that your father died when you were young, and then you say he was an accountant, and then instantly you go into what
accountant joke.
A very funny joke, which we must have.
Yes, you want to? Oh, yeah. Yes. An accountant's walking down the street, suddenly confronted by a poor old tramp, a dosser, who said, "Give us £1. I haven't eaten for 3 days." And the accountant said, "How does this compare to the same period last year?" Now you see, there we go. Immediately, oh, that's it. And people say to me, why don't you just talk on the stage? I'm restless. I'm looking for the next laugh, the next joke.
But with your wife and children...
This is turning into in the psychiatrist's chair.
It is. But now I'm just interested because you've been married a long time. You've got several children. In that time...
4.
Yeah, 4. There are serious conversations that have to be had. Do you do that then? I mean, does your wife end up screaming at you?
Yeah.
Will you please just be serious for a minute?
Yes. Oh, yes. And the family have done it when they're growing up. Yeah, all right, Dad, yes. Get the joke out of the way. Now, this is what we're talking about, yeah.
Leeds Grammar School, which is where you went, the performing, it did happen there, didn't it? Because you won an acting cup.
I shared an acting cup with my friend John Gledhill. He played Hal and I played Falstaff, and had a massive bolster, big in the pillow in, which fell out regularly at performances, and covered in talcum powder, wig and everything. And I remember the then Princess Royal or something presented it to us, and it detached from its little plinth, and I gave him the plinth and kept the cap. And got a laugh, oh dear. Probably that sowed seeds or something.
But the other, having played Falstaff, literature, I mean, that was a big thing for you, because you actually, when you went to university, you read English literature.
It was, yes, I'm BA English, failed.
Because they kicked you out, yeah.
Yes, I was too running around doing other things. I would say I failed due to the outbreak of the Second World War, which was 16 years before, but upset me very deeply. There we go.
Which is one of your diversionary jokes.
Indeed. No, my first year results really showed that I'd been in the bar and chasing girls and all sorts of things. The plus ça change, but I wasn't proud of that. Blue Eyes got to university and blew it. I'd really felt ashamed that I'd let people down, and my mum had been so supportive and everything. But by the same token, if I hadn't been at university, a guy came up to Leeds to see somebody in the student show, not me, and saw me telling jokes and offered me work. So I think it accelerated the process. I think I've probably finished up doing what I do anyway, perhaps.
In that Leeds University stage review, if only we had tapes of it, because there were 3 performers in that. One of them went on to win the Nobel Prize for Literature.
Yes.
Another to become one of the most admired poets of the 20th century. And then the other one was you.
And Tony Harrison, the poet, and Wally Soyinka, great man who won the Nobel and was imprisoned during the war in what was Nigeria.
Do you have any contact with him?
No, there's just been a couple of phone calls through the years. He did a wreath lecture a year or so ago, and I couldn't get to that. I'd love to have seen him, because he's a really patriarchal figure now with the white hair and the beard and everything. He looks magnificent now, Wally, and I'm trying to get in touch with Tony Harrison again. It comes round when you get to a certain age, you start huddling together for warmth, I think. Your contemporaries.
I interviewed Tony Harrison recently for his 70th birthday for BBC Radio 4, and something rather surprising happened during it, which is we were talking about poetry, and I asked him if he wrote poetry at university, and he said no, the great poet at university was Barry Cryer, and he suddenly recited this poem from memory.
Yes, Tony was editing a magazine, and he put it in the magazine. I'd forgotten I'd written it. It's quite short. Lotz became naturally rather peeved when his sex life came to a halt. Well, wouldn't you, if you had to make do with occasional pinches of salt? I was very touched Tony remembered it.
Yeah, verbatim. So you got kicked out, but you don't particularly regret it.
It was fall or push time. I think, it's a long time ago, Mark, I think I was offered a couple of retakes. I think I could have sort of scrambled back in, but by then events were taking over and I was on tour, in shows called Fanny Get Your Fun, and we've nothing on tonight. Self-explanatory, I think.
But because of your background, university, I suppose, as well, you were in showbiz in the early years. You were known as Toff.
Well, yes, the stage crew at the Empire, because I made a false start in the business and went back to Leeds, tail between the legs, and went back to the theatre where I'd been jumping about, showing off as a student. Great man called Johnny Gunn, stage manager. Very bulky Scot. He was a good man. And he got me a job as a stagehand. And in the morning, I emptied 3 bars, the bottles and all that. And I can assure you, empties are heavy. No lift, stalled circle gallery. And then I'd go home for a rest or whatever. And then I'd come back at night and be a stagehand. And, I'd been at university, so it was quite affectionate. I mean, they just called me Toff, the rest of the lads. And I had a good time there. And you met the most amazing people because, the band call on a Monday morning when everybody arrived to rehearse their songs and whatever. And, I was hovering about and I was supposed to be working, trying to get close to Max Wall and people like that. Oh, that was a great period.
It's going to be the same when we get you to London, but it's strippers always. It was comedy and stripping.
Yes, there's a theme emerging because my first jobs after leaving university were in strip shows. David Nixon had become my mentor because I was his assistant when he did a pantomime in Leeds. Not on the stage, like his dresser and everything. And we became friends, and he gave me his phone number, and I went to London with this 17-day ticket. And David invited me to his shows, introduced me to people, but, what was I going to do in 17 days? And the day before the ticket ran out, I swear, I got an audition at the Windmill. They used to do auditions about 10 o'clock in the morning. The first show was at 12:15. And I went on and told some jokes and sang a song. And the voice from the darkness, which, later, obviously, was the boss, Vivian Van Damme, a formidable man, known to us all as VD. And this voice said, do you know any more jokes? I said, yes, and told a couple more. Know another song? Yes, but I haven't brought the music. Ronnie will help. Ronnie Bridges, the pianist, became a friend. So he bust a song for me. And then I was in a state of shock. I was taken away off the stage and told dressing room 12A and informed that I was in the show.
For that day? That lunchtime, yeah.
Van Damme was an amazing man. He put me in. He didn't cut anybody from the show or whatever. I don't know how he did it, but he shoved me in as the bottom of the bill. And I was on the stage at about 12:30. And then I was called to the old man's office between every show that day.
But 6 times a day?
Yeah. So the 5 gaps during the shows, I was in his office between the desk and the fish tank. Do it. And I had to do his act. Don't like that joke. That one's good. You're doing it too early. Move it to the end. It was like a masterclass. He practically changed my act in one day. Just amazing. And then I rang my mum, and she'd no concept of what a windmill comedian was. And that was it. I was thrown in the deep end, and I met a man called Bruce Forsyth. I found out what happened to him. Bruce was there.
Although you say in the memoirs, Brucey, we might never have known what happened to Brucey because he almost gave up.
Yes, he did. We were talking one day, and he said, because he was already in that world of the windmill, a real institution, very well known. He had his name on the honours boards outside when he was still there. And Bruce said to me once, I've got as far as I'll get. He said, got to pack it in. I said, what are you going to do? He said, open a little shop, tobacconists. And the following year, 1958, I read that he was the new compere of Sunday Night at London Palladium. And I think it was Kingsway in London. I bumped into Bruce. He'd just been to a press conference for the next Sunday, live, millions of viewers and everything. And I congratulated him. I said, what's happened to the tobacconists? He said, postponed. Been postponed for 50 years now.
VD Van Damme, who had been your great champion in London, having been very good to you, he just cut you off.
Yeah, but looking back, I know what he was on about. You'd served your apprenticeship. He wanted to see how you got on. He was really interested in what happened to people after they left the theatre. And of course it was quite devastating at the time, because I think I was probably getting complacent. But he always kept you on your toes, because the shows would run, I can't remember now, about 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but towards the end, he would say, I want a new act. And you'd go in and audition a new act for him in the morning. And he'd often turn you down, but he'd say, come again tomorrow. And one week, I thought, this is it. I'm out of work. And I auditioned 3 different things that week. And on the 3rd day, he said, come on Sunday, which was shorthand, the dress rehearsal for the new show, you're still working. And then he said to me one day, well, that's it. I wish you all the very best of luck. He said, it's time to go out into the wicked world. And I thought, he's sacking me, he's dropping me. But looking back, I think, and I've compared notes with other people who worked there, he sort of groom you through and, give you the training and the experience, and then throw you out into the world and see how you got on.
Then you had this musical interlude in which you were in a West End musical, Expresso Bongo, but then, even more improbably, had a #1 hit in Finland.
Yes. That was another mentor and good friend was Frankie Vaughan, the singer, and he recorded for Philips Records. And I was bottom of the bill comic, and Paul Cave, Frank's manager, took me over. But, I was out of work more than in, so Paul had me working in the office, answering fan mail and making the tea and everything. And looking back, then again, you see, I get a bit embarrassed because it was obvious you were just keeping Frank happy. They got me an audition with Fontana Records, a subsidiary of Philips. And Frank came with me to the audition. I mean, looking back, they must have been going, oh boy, here's Frank's protege. They've opened another can. Where have they found this one? And I got a little contract, 3 records with an option, which was never taken up. But my first record was a little cover of The Purple People Eater by Sheb Woolley, country singer and actor. It was sort of the E.T. of its day, about Purple People Eater that came from outer space. Massive hit in America. Quite a hit here, but I think for contractual reasons or something, it wasn't issued in Scandinavia. And they pushed out my little English cover version.
Well, I saw the thing coming out of the sky. It had one long horn, one big eye. I commenced to shaking and I said, hooey, it looks like the Purple People Eater to me.
And then I got a call, you're #1 in Finland. For 3 weeks. I'm very proud of that.
Can you give us a quick burst?
Oh, no, what? I shall just declaim it. I saw the thing coming out of the sky. It had one long horn and one big eye. I commenced to shaking and I said, hooey, it looks like a Purple People Eater to me. No more, Mark, please, don't inflict it on me.
Tremendous. Around this time, a key event was getting married. Now, there's a very odd little reference in the memoirs that you wrote your wife a poem called That Old White Magic. About the
No, I wrote a lyric for her to sing.
About the joys of cocaine.
Yes, I knew nothing about drugs. But, you know, there we go again, the feeble pun. Write a parody of that old black magic, call it that old white magic. And at the time, I was having a pretty rough time with the skin and everything. And this vision with a stiff neck and a scarf and dark glasses who'd written a lyric entitled That Old White Magic. I mean, she said the first impressions were not good.
Because we talked at the beginning about this cliche of the pain beneath the jokes. There was literal pain for you, as you suggest there, because you had really very severe eczema.
Yeah, I was in hospital 12 times in 8 years, twice on a stretcher, and once bandaged head to foot, dark glasses and gloves. I'm invisible man. And years ago at St James's Hospital in Leeds, a man hanged himself. Skin ward. For sheer desperation and the misery he was going through. It's much better controlled now than it used to be with the cortisone-based treatments and everything. In those days, it was heavy tar, and your hands always looked as if you hadn't washed for ages after. Oh, it was an amazing period. When I was the Invisible Man, I was in outpatients, and I just walked out of the hospital and walked down the street just to see if anybody would look. And you don't see anybody looking. They probably thought it was a stunt for some promotions. I mean, I turned around at one point, saw a little boy going like that and his mother going. And then I went in to a tobacconist. This vision walks in, and this woman looked at me, and I said 20 whatevers to buy some cigarettes. And she said, "It turned out nice today, love, hasn't it?" And that was it, and I walked out of the shop.
And was there ever any suggestion of where it came from, the eczema?
You can only speak for yourself, just subjectively. I think there was a psychological root, because after meeting my wife, you know, and then we had 4 children, and what a day that was. You see, you can't stop. No, seriously, the skin has increasingly got better through the years. And I've been with her, so I think she should be on prescription. It can't be a coincidence. It's so marked that the period when my skin started getting better was after I met her.
And she ended a run of bad luck with women because although you were surrounded by strippers, you had this ability to pick the lesbians.
Yes. I began to think, you know, sexually, I was a sort of fridge magnet, you know, an erring touch, you know, that the wrong one. Oh, Charlotte. Oh, I'm going all dreamy now, Mark. Charlotte. Charlotte Palmer. Are you watching this, Charlotte? Where are you? And I fell violently in love with Charlotte Palmer. And I used to do a commentary for her act. There'd be a cardboard Eiffel Tower on the stage. And I would stand on the side going, "Now Desiree takes us to Paris." And the management wouldn't pay me any extra for that. So she gave me 20 players every Saturday night.
And you talked about things getting better when you met your wife. You were pretty miserable at one point before that, weren't you?
Well, it was a cliche. It was bedsitter misery, you know, and in and out of hospital, bed sits, out of work. And the upside, the positive side was you made so many friends very quickly because so many of you were out of work, and you would meet at what we then called the labour exchange, job centre. And you did make friends quite quickly. You were all in the same boat, and you'd nurse a cup of tea for 2 hours in a tea shop or half a pint in a pub and just talk and laugh. And I've got friends this day I met during that period.
And your career really took off first of all, with writing comedy for various people, Danny LaRue, David Frost, Kenny Everett, Morecambe Wise, and so on, Tommy Cooper. Could you adapt any joke to any performer?
I don't know about the same joke, but you could write a sketch or a routine in 5 different ways for 5 different comedians, because you know that he wouldn't do it like him or her wouldn't. You know what I mean? The good ones have all got such individuality that you've got to tailor it for them. The other thing was, after the early days, I never wrote alone. I always wrote in partnership, because if you're on your own and you have a mental block and it won't happen, you're in a bit of trouble. But if there's 2 of you, or even 3 of you with some shows, you start batting the ideas around and something's liable to happen. John Junkin, the late, John Junkin and I wrote a lot for Eric and Ernie, and John did a marvellous Eric Morecambe. I mean, Dennis Norden always says there's the sitter and the pacer. There's someone typing and someone walking about. And I would sit there scribbling or typing, and John would walk around waggling his glasses. And, you've got the feel. You've got to hear their voices in your head and see the way they move, the whole thing.
And presumably part of the problem is that they'll turn material down. They'll say that doesn't work for me, or that's not funny.
I always said Eric and Ernie, particularly Eric, were not easy to write for, and I meant that as a compliment. Eric particularly was the script vetter, and he knew. He had a wonderful instinct, and sometimes he would say, "This is funny, but it's not us." Was Kenny Everett, who wasn't a comedian, the only non-comedian I ever wrote for, he was Kenny Everett. So he had no preconceived ideas of what he did. A good comic will say, "That's funny, but it's not me." Kenny would just go, "Ooh," and have a go at it. He was a natural, but he wasn't a comedian per se.
Would you ever get annoyed that it was them doing it rather than you? Was there any resentment?
Never. I've often been asked that, Mark. I'm a backroom boy, that's what I do. And if you're writing for someone as good as Eric and Ernie, or the two Ronnies, or Tommy, or Frankie Howard, they bring something to it, whatever they do, that makes it seem better than it was, probably. They bring themselves to bear on it, and you get sort of a bit more credit than maybe you even deserve, because you write for somebody good.
And viewers, when they look at double acts in comedy, they tend to think one is the really funny one. So people would say Eric Morecambe, Ronnie Barker, they were the really funny ones.
Yeah.
Did you think that as writers?
No. I mean, we always admired, and I've done a lot of it myself, we always admired the feed. He or she is the rock upon which the sea of humour breaks, Mark. No, the feeding is an art. And, Eric said very affectionately about Ernie, he had this cruel streak, he said, "Oh, he's not the best straight man in the world, but he's the best one I'll ever have." Because they just were like that. I mean, they just like telepathy. Eric was such a perfectionist, and he would rehearse ad-libs, and he knew every word and every syllable. He used to get irritated with Ernie, who was a slower learner and was still reading the script. And Eric had it just like that, but even the great Morecambe, he's talking about the bosses at the BBC, and he says to Ernie, "Oh, there they are walking down the Powers of corridor." And Ernie, just like that, said, "Pardon?" He said, "Backwards, of course." It was the speed. He was annoyed with himself for that strange spoonerism or, transposition. But that was the speed of the reaction. Backwards, of course.
Someone you didn't write for but met, which a lot of people will envy you, is Groucho Marx.
Oh, yes. I met him once. He was over in Elstree doing the Marty Feldman show. Marty Feldman Comedy Machine. I had a copy of the Groucho letters. And there was a writer called Barry, an American, and we used to meet and have a drink a lot and got on very well, who I later found out was Barry Levinson.
Right.
Not unknown as a big-time
film director, yeah.
And we hit it off, and that was great. And Groucho Marx was in the restaurant at Elstree, over there with Larry Gelbart. And Barry Levinson said to me, "What's the book?" I said, "The Groucho letters." I said, "If there's a moment, if not, it doesn't happen." I said, "If there's a moment, the great man," I'd love it signed, obviously. So he takes it from me. I said, "He's having his lunch, Barry." And he goes over. Groucho Marx says, I'm practically hiding now. And Barry brings a book back to me, and then Barry said, what he'd put in it, I didn't see. And he just put, by Groucho. So Barry said, do you want it personalising? I said, no, he's having it. And he went back again. No, I am hiding. I've gone behind a pillar now. And apparently what had happened was, Barry Levinson said, could you put to Barry? And then, for some reason, which sounds so insulting, would you put Marx, as if, how many Grouchos? And he put Marx in the wrong place. I've got a copy of the Groucho letters to Barry Marx from Groucho Marx. He treated me like a brother.
American comedy writing, the big tradition there is the writer's room, which
Yes.
we're seeing at the moment in Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip,
Yeah.
but we've seen in many films huge amounts of them together. That's been less common in Britain, hasn't it? It's very often, in fact, most often, it's pairs writing together. But as you say, you think that's because one of you will always have inspiration.
We've never gone for, except in these sketch shows, the contributory shows like the two Ronnies and everything, the writing credit at the end, Spike Mullins, great man who wrote Ronnie Corbett in the Chair and everything, used to call it the dead of 2 world wars as the writing credits came off. So many names. And of course, contractually, they would have everybody's name on who'd written anything for the whole series, not just for that night. But I didn't blame anybody at home for saying it took 22 people to write that show. But no, I don't think to this day we've gone really much for the factory principle, the big team of writers. And I love the Lone Wolves, of course, the great Johnny Spate, who just did his own thing. Johnny and I started writing an hour for Francis Howard in concert. And it was such a disaster, we started laughing because he was a lone wolf. Every time we sat down together to try and write something, we started disagreeing. So we wrote the show together separately. We wrote sort of half each, got together and knocked it into shape. But we all laughed about that. He was never meant to be a partner, Johnny. John Cleese and I sat down to write a sketch once, The Frost Report, and that didn't work either. Because John wanted to go back over page 1. He was meticulous and almost every word. And I wanted to write the whole thing in a white heat burst and then think, no, screw it up, throw it in the bin and start again. That's not John's style. And his wasn't mine. You know, it's fascinating, the sort of chemistry that doesn't work, as well as what does, if you find a real partner.
The ethics of it, because the late Bob Monkhouse was affectionately known, as other comedians have been, as the thief of bad gags, and there's another performer who was known as the bubonic plagiarist.
I've no idea who you're talking about, Mark.
Do you have rules about that, about taking other people's gags?
There are club rules on that. It doesn't happen now because, as we're saying in another context, the stand-ups don't tell jokes per se. But in the old days, comedians would be known for telling particular jokes and would get very annoyed if you did a joke that they did. And it never really happened as a real confrontation, but I would have said to a comic, I'm sorry, I didn't know you wrote that. And they would have to say, well, I didn't, it's a joke. And then you go, I got that joke the way you got it. I heard it somewhere. I didn't nick it from your act. That was the big thing in the old days. That's my joke. Well, there's no such thing. Jokes are jokes. You know, you would lay off if a comic was very well known for one particular joke, but in the general currency, there's no copyright on jokes. Material, very different. You never touch anybody else's material, per se.
So what's the distinction between... Oh, they've written for themselves, yeah.
Oh, Jeffrey Archer. I went to a lunch once, and there are bits in my after-dinner set or whatever, you know, there's about... I do linking and continuity. The dead giveaway is the sequence, and he did 5 minutes of me. And the giveaway was, it was exactly the same sequence and the wording. And I thought, well, I don't know what I can do about this. And it was a lunch, and I was leaving the hotel. Footsteps of famous novelist Barry. He'd never give me the time of day normally. Barry, do you know what he said? I changed it a bit in the middle. What do you think? I said, I'll settle for lunch. Never heard another word.
David Frost, something came out of that which has led to, in some ways, to your performing career, because he got you doing warm-up, which was
yes.
Yeah.
I was a writer on the roster, and I don't know what had happened about the warm-up, which you have in a TV studio, if anybody has not been. And David said, oh, you're doing the warm-up next Wednesday. I said, I can't do that. And he'd seen me doing the chairman in an old-time music hall or whatever. He said, no, I've seen you emceeing and everything. And that was, yes, that opened another door, and I did a lot of warm-ups and realised that you don't do your act. You're not there to show off. They haven't come to see you. It's just chatting to the audience and being the link, and the link between the show and the audience. Some warm-up men, mainly men, would really go to town doing their act, you know, they'd do blue jokes before a clean sitcom.
Oh, well, I've heard there were people who would be banned, wouldn't they? Besides,
yes.
they were too funny or too blue. Or...
They were A, too funny, or B, too blue. There's a lovely story about a young comic doing the warm-up at Granada Television years ago, and he had a couple of jokes about astrology. And he said to the audience, shout out your star sign, I'll tell you your chief characteristics. And the guy shouted, Aquarius. And he said, Big Mouth always wants to get in first, you see, ha, ha, ha. Young comics in the bar with the producer afterwards, and the producer said, you were very good, I want to use you again. He said, oh, thank you. He said, I love the astrology joke. He said, how did you know somebody was going to shout Aquarius?
A large part of your career, which would have seemed unlikely at the time when they started a little radio show, I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue.
Yes.
Which has become a legend, in fact.
Well, there again, the word keeps occurring. We don't analyse, we're just very happy about it. It's 35 years now, 1972. It wasn't regarded as some great hit. It was a spin-off from I'm Sorry, I'll Read That Again. And it didn't augur well in the beginning. Nobody said, oh, this is a new hottie, this is going to do well. You know, it was almost sinking without trace at one point, and then it just went on, and then we got best producer we've ever had, John Naismith, and his input is amazing, and he really revitalised the show.
And finally, Barry, can you answer this gardener's question? When sowing my seeds, I find many of the small ones stick to my hands. Is there an answer? Is there an answer,
Stop
please?
it, you'll go deaf.
And it features two things which we talked about at the very beginning, which are wordplay, which is a large part
Oh,
of
yeah.
it, but also filth.
Yes.
The script is quite astonishingly filthy.
Humph calls it blue chip filth, yes. That wonderful patriarchal air, that, you know, and that wonderful bored air, let's get this over and go home, and I've been given this to do, but I'm not quite clear what, you know. It wouldn't work with anybody else. And the double entendre is back triumphantly.
There's a stage version now. You're into your 70s. You're doing more and more. There are at least 2 stage shows you do, apart from that one,
Yeah.
on your own around the country.
Yeah, no knowledge of my limitations.
No, but it's an interesting move, though. I mean, having written for so long, you've done more and more performing.
It's gone full circle, I suppose, because the market was drying up as a freelance sketch gag writer. And I'd been lucky. I'd been doing after dinners a bit and stuff and bits of television through the time I was a writer. So I just hoped that the performing would come back. And where's the wood? It has. No, I'm very happy. A lot of travelling, a lot of touring, but, I love it.
After dinner speaking, I've done a couple of them, and I found it horrendous.
You told me you did a marathon.
Well, I did a 4.5-hour prize-giving one.
Well, I can't match that.
But more nervous than I've ever got about anything. You can't eat beforehand. You finish about midnight and they've cleared all the drink away. I never understand why anyone wants to do it, but you actually enjoy it, do you?
Well, it's my pension, I suppose. And I can enjoy the meal now, because it's been a long time, I suppose. Yes, I've got over that hurdle. I can enjoy the meal. You've got to watch that before you speak. That's a very definite.
And when you're talking to dentists and quantity surveyors and all the rest of it, but are there rules? There are rules to that, aren't there, as to what extent you should tailor it to?
Yeah, well, I always do a poem. I always get, well, now it's email and everything, but the old days they send you a brochure, and it's just rhyming couplets. But that's my sort of trademark, and I finish with that. And I think, oh, the old man knows who he's talking to.
So the poem, if it is...
The poem is relevant to them.
Accountants or quantity surveyors or whatever, you will write a poem.
Yes. And whatever they think of it, they know I didn't do it the night before somewhere else. It's written for them, you know. But never tell plumbers plumbing jokes. An old hand tipped me off. He said they know them all. They know more jokes about their job than you do, and better ones. So I never do that. I never do that. The great Steve Martin, I've got an audio tape at home of Steve Martin telling a very involved joke about 2 plumbers called Harry and Bill, and there's very little reaction in the audience. And then the punchline, the very end of the joke is, and Harry said, Bill, this is a P-17, not a K-28. Long pause, baffled audience. And then Martin shouted, you bastard, you told me the plumbers were in. You know, he's tailoring for plumbers who aren't there. Oh, it's a very esoteric joke, but no, you mustn't patronise them by telling them jokes about their own job.
And heckling, because they get drunker and drunker in my experience in the course of the evening.
Yeah, I don't get heckled, it's depressing. I don't know what it is. I'm
You'd
going
like
to
to be
tour my
heckled.
own heckler, I think. No, I get too much respect now, and I don't want it. In that sense.
You're an elder statesman of British comedy now, you see.
Am I?
Well, obviously, that's why they
Well,
respect you.
no, I mean, when you think of giants like Eric Sykes, or the great Doddy, I mean, if you're talking about performing.
Ken Dodd, yeah.
Oh, Dodd looms over us all. He's wonderful.
You don't want him as your accountant, though, do you, really?
Still in his act. He's still talking about it.
They keep going so long, comedians. I mean, until the very end. I mean, we know. I mean, Eric Morecambe died on stage. They don't like retiring.
No, it's very well. George Burns, great George, was 100 and was still been doing jobs and everything. I think they still want to go on somewhere tonight and make people laugh. Or the best ones are realists and think, can I still? I haven't lost it, have I? And the money and the fame doesn't mean anything. It's can I make that audience laugh tonight, however old they are.
And that side of it, the expectation that you will make people laugh, you must get that. Everyone gets that. And there are comedians who have become very, very angry about it, that the cab driver who says, go on, make me laugh for the next 20 minutes, the person at dinner.
Eric Morecambe used to say, people approached me with a glassy smile on their face. And Eric was actually a rather quiet man, very courteous in company, and wanted to talk about football or politics or sex or whatever. But he said, people come up with us and twiddle the glasses, say something funny. He said, I don't blame them. He said, it goes with the job, you know, I'll start being silly. But he would rather have been sitting quietly in the corner having a chat. But there again, nobody says to a plumber in a pub, saw the job you did last night, that was crap. We're in a profession where people feel quite cheerful about coming up to you in a pub saying, I saw that load of rubbish you did last night, you know, right in front of everybody.
Do you plan to keep going as long as you possibly
Oh,
can?
I don't. We don't retire. The phone stops ringing. It's over. No, my wife had given up. She says, how old are you? No, I enjoy it. My young friend Mike McIntyre, who's very good stand-up, who's the son of Ray Cameron, with whom I used to write Kenny Everett shows. Are you following the plot? Mike McIntyre said to me the other day in Edinburgh, he said, still hungry, aren't you? And I said, what do you mean? He said, you're still enjoying it. I said, yeah. Couldn't do it if I didn't like it. Oh, faking it, Mark, it'd be exhausting.
Although you've made one adjustment to age, which is you've discovered you've gone from stand-up comedy to sit-down comedy.
To sit down, my friend Steve Olathorn, had an idea for me, and they got the big throne chair from the library bar at the Gilded Balloon in Edinburgh and put it on the stage. I mean, it just looms. It looks like a papal audience. And I thought, oh boy, is this going to work? And you're never too old to learn. I loved it suddenly. You weren't sort of standing up doing a dominating bit with the audience. You were looking at an audience who was sitting down, as were you. And you do adopt a more conversational style. You can't go at them very strongly when you're sitting down. Oh, it's lovely.
We should probably go out on a joke. Desert Island Gags, what's your favourite joke of all?
One of my favourites, just for sentimental reasons, I told it 50 years ago in a student show, and I met somebody the other day who remembered me telling it. A man is driving down a country lane, and he ran over a cockerel, and he was upset. And he went to the farmhouse, knocked on the door, and a woman answered the door, and he said, I appear to have killed your cockerel. I'd like to replace him. And she said, please yourself, the hens are round the back.
Barry Cry, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.